She looked him in the eye, punched the launch override, and left him to die. Thesvara of the Veskari Continuum did not glance back as the canyon walls of Vethkar sealed shut behind her guard shuttle. The null cord had come up out of the regolith like a black tide, and her commander's protocol had been clean and cold. The soft escort was expendable. The bride was not. He was only a human. Grade 2. Civilian contract. The cheapest listing the treaty office had been able to schedule before the ceremonial deadline. He had a coat patched twice at the left elbow and a face that had made its peace with not sleeping. He was still shooting when the rock closed over him. She laughed a little, in the dim of the shuttle, the way you laugh when a thing is finished. 6 months later, she came back to Vethkar to collect his bones for the human embassy. She did not find a grave. She found a mountain of corpses and a man who had simply refused to die. The air in the convoy bay, 6 months earlier, tasted of copper and burnt ozone and the cheap ionizing grease the loading crews used on the seal case runners. It hung there in the recycler like something you could scoop with a spoon. Thesvara noticed it the way a bride notices everything on the day her old name ends and her new one begins, which was to say she noticed it and immediately did not. She was thinking about the color of the ceremonial thread on her wrist, about the 6 generations of Veskari matriarchs who had worn its weight before her, about the diplomatic wording she was expected to speak in the assembly ratification chamber. She was thinking about anything but the war her marriage was supposed to end. Her true name was a cascade of wing clicks that the human tongue could not fold around. The interpreter unit at her collar flattened it without apology to Thesvara. She had stopped resenting the flattening decades ago. Some things could not survive the crossing. The human waited at the entry ramp with the treaty office badge clipped to his coat. He was not tall. He was not broad. He was built like a piece of dock equipment that had been used until it was tired and then used a little more. He had a bolt pistol at his hip loaded, according to the customs manifest, with depleted tungsten slugs of the kind used to crack ore casings in low-atmosphere mining. She had glanced at the manifest that morning and laughed the small laugh you laugh when a thing is beneath your consideration. "Contractor Morden," her chamberlain said. His voice was smooth and cool, and Thesvara did not look at him, because she never truly looked at Consort Avon. He was a piece of furniture that spoke. "You will attend Her Radiance Thesvara from this bay to the wedding pavilion at Karvesken, Grade 2 civilian per the treaty deadline. You understand your responsibilities?" "I do," the human said. "Your name," Thesvara said, because the diplomatic training was in her before she had decided to be diplomatic. "Cal Morden, Anchorage." He said it the way you would say the name of a small tool. "I will see you to the altar and back, on my word." Thesvara laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. It was the laugh of a woman who had heard 1,000 vows from 100 honor guards, from soldiers with rank sashes and blood tokens and the pheromone tattoos of the elite Veskari skycasts. It was the laugh of a person who had watched a mining tool declare itself a sword. Avon allowed himself a small, courteous chuckle. The human did not react at all. He simply looked at her, tired and patient, and stepped aside so she could board. She did not think about him again for 3 days. On the 3rd day, above the dead moon, Vethkar, the null cord came. They came out of the wrong side of the moon at the wrong hour, which meant they had known the convoy route. Thesvara felt her guard commander stiffen at the tactical rail. She heard the private frequency crackle and knew what it would say before it was said. Veskari protocol was simple: consolidate the primary. The bride's shuttle would jump. The picket ships would burn to cover the jump. The soft escort in the ancillary bay, the human alone, with his tired coat and his ore-cracking pistol, would remain to be overrun. Thesvara did not look back. That was protocol also. But the shuttle's aft camera stayed on for the length of a single breath as they lifted, and in that breath she saw him, a small figure at the bay door, unhurried, sliding a fresh magazine into the pistol with the unbothered motion of a man loading a punch clock. She saw the first null-cord commando come around the edge of the ramp with a plasma lance already lit, and she saw the human tilt his head a quarter turn as if measuring the joint of the armor at the throat. She saw the tungsten slug leave the barrel and pass through the plasma shield and through the null-cord's neck without any theater, without any pause, the way water passes through paper. She had been told all her life that null-cord shields were absolute. She had watched a mining tool put a hole in absolute. The bay door sealed. The shuttle jumped. Thesvara sat in the humming quiet of the ascent chamber with her ceremonial thread on her wrist and thought for the first time in a long while about nothing at all. At the relay station on Kar Veskan, the wedding did not happen. The treaty ratification did not happen. Word of the ambush moved along the diplomatic lines like a fever, and by nightfall of the fourth day, the corridors of the receiving palace were full of court officers speaking in the false, careful voices people used when they were afraid. Avon attended to her with the smooth cool of oil on water. He brought her a cup of the mineral suspension that the Veskari served at state functions and called coffee. He said the appropriate things about the honorable dead. He said no one could have foreseen the coordinates the null cord had used. Thesvara said the convoy route was sealed. Yes, Radiance. By the loading crew. Yes, Radiance. 32 of them, if I counted the manifest correctly. I would have to check, Radiance, but that number is very close. She looked at Avon then, which she almost never did. He was as smooth as the mineral suspension in the cup. He was, she noticed, wearing his ceremonial sash on the wrong shoulder. She said nothing about that. She said, "Please have someone send condolences to the family of the human contractor Cal Morden of Anchorage, Earth." Of course, Radiance. That night, she did not sleep. She thought about a man loading a punch clock. She thought about a tungsten slug passing through the impossible. She thought about the way Avon's ceremonial sash had lain on the wrong shoulder, as if put on in a hurry, as if put on by someone who had been elsewhere earlier than he claimed. On the 41st day after the ambush, the deep space listening posts of the Tarith Assembly picked up a distress signal on a channel no one used anymore. The signal was human. It was very short. It gave the coordinates of the abandoned relay station on Vethkar, and it said, in the calm, clipped Anchorage cadence of a man who was not asking for help so much as filing paperwork. "This is Escort Morden. I have hostages. I need extraction inside 90 days. The word hostages, in a signal from a man who had been marked killed in action by the Veskari War Office 6 weeks earlier, ran through the Tarith Assembly like a hot wire. The Tarith were the great neutrals of the sector. Their neutrality was strategic and it was theological, and the null cord had counted on it as the fixed star of their planning. On the 43rd day, the Tarith Prime Speaker's response was short, and it was public, and it changed the arithmetic of 2 systems. "We are coming." Thesvara heard the announcement from the corridor outside her chamber. She stood very still. She thought about a man who had said, on his word, that he would see her to the altar and back. She thought about the shape of the word, hostages. She was Veskari nobility, and she had been raised not to feel any particular thing on her face, but her guard commander told her later that when she walked into the situation chamber that morning, her wing plates were pinned so tight against her spine that the plates whined against each other like tuning forks. She was not asked to be on the recovery flight. She required it. The relay station at Vethkar sat in the shadow of a basalt shelf that the ancient Veskari had chipped smooth to build a listening post that had not listened in 8 generations. From the air, it looked like nothing. From the ground, it looked at first like nothing. Then the recovery party's floods came up, and Thesvara understood that she was looking at a wall. The wall was made of null-cord commandos. Not a metaphor, not a poetic tally. A wall of bodies stacked with the exhausted, purposeful geometry of a person who had needed cover from plasma fire and had used the material at hand. Some of the bodies still wore intact armor. Some of them were held together with insulation foam and dock tape. The wall had been rebuilt several times. You could see the strata where an older section had been collapsed and remade at a different angle. In one place, a null-cord sergeant's helmet had been welded to a length of ventilation duct to serve as a periscope. The welding was ugly, and it was very good. Thesvara walked along the wall. She had thought on the flight in that she was prepared for numbers. She was not. She counted because she was trained to count, and she counted more than she wanted to count, and she stopped. Her guard commander, who had once been the man to sign the order that left Cal Morden on this rock, did not speak. He had the look of a soldier who had understood something very large about himself very quickly. They found the man inside the station's inner ring. He was sitting on an ammunition crate with his coat still on, still patched twice at the left elbow, drinking something dark from a Vescari drinking bowl he had adapted with wire so it would sit level on the crate. His left arm was bandaged with what looked like the fabric from a null-cord banner. His face was bruised in the way faces bruise when they have been bruised many times and healed and been bruised again. He looked up when Thesvara stepped through the seal, and he did not stand. "Radiance," he said. His voice was worn. It was not unfriendly. "Your Tarith friends are outside." "They are. They took their time." "Yes." He set the bowl down. He wiped his mouth with the back of his good hand. He did not look at her long. He looked mostly at the floor. He said, "The bride's seal case manifest. 32 names on the loading crew. 29 null-cord bodies out there account for 26 of them. 3 still walking. One of them is still in your wedding party." "How do you know?" "They're identification chips." He nodded at a metal box on the crate beside him. 93 chips, sorted. He said the sort as if he were talking about invoices. "You will want to open the box on your ship, not here." Thesvara looked at the box. She looked at him. She said, "You held this station for 6 months." "Yes." "With what?" "The pistol." He almost smiled. He did not have the energy to complete it. "And then their pistols. And then this." He lifted his right hand and showed her a length of pipe, fitted with a null-cord energy cell, in a way that made no theoretical sense, and had clearly worked repeatedly. And then, mostly patience. Her wing plates were whining again. She said, "Contractor Morden." "Ma'am, you said, on your word, that you would see me to the altar and back." He did not answer that. He looked at the floor. He picked up the bowl again and finished what was in it. He said, "I have not been to the altar yet." The Tarith medic who examined Cal Morden on the flight home documented his biology with the clinical horror of a technician watching physics misbehave. The medic was a small, tall creature with 3 sets of eyes and a very tidy voice. He read his observations aloud because it was Tarith practice, and Thesvara listened because she could not do anything else. Bone density at 140% of Vescari baseline. Musculature calibrated for a homeworld gravity of 1G, which was, in the medic's tidy voice, absurdly high. Functional range of motion through a healed plasma graze on the right shoulder that would have collapsed a Vescari soldier into hemorrhagic shock inside a minute. Evidence of at least 4 field cauterized wounds, none of which had been sutured under anesthesia. Blood work consistent with a hydration and caloric intake that the medic categorized in his notes as impossible. Nervous system readings that the medic's instruments returned 3 times before he decided to trust them. "This," the medic said softly, to the drawer of instruments and not to anyone in the room, "is not correct." "He is correct," Thesvara said. "He is a species. I have read papers on radiance. The papers said the numbers were exaggerated." "They were not," Thesvara said. Cal Morden was asleep. His face was slack. His mouth was open a little. He looked like a man in his 40s who had been used too long. He did not look like the thing the medic was describing. The medic set down his stylus. He said, "Radiance. In your file it says you laughed at his oath." "Yes." "May I say a thing that is not diplomatic?" "Yes." "Do not," the medic said, "laugh at any oath a human makes to you ever again." Thesvara did not laugh at him. She did not laugh at anything for a long time after that. The wedding did not happen on Karveskan. It happened on a Tareth-neutral moon under a treaty that had been rewritten in 4 languages in 11 days. And it was smaller than any Veskari wedding in 6 generations, and it was watched by more cameras than any Veskari wedding in 11. Cal Morden stood at the head of the aisle in a clean coat with the elbow patches replaced. He wore the same pistol on his hip. Nobody made him take it off. Nobody in the room felt they had the standing. Avon attended. He wore his ceremonial sash on the correct shoulder this time. He performed the Chamberlain's function with the same smooth cool as ever. Thesvara watched him from beneath the ceremonial veil and thought, for the first time in her life, about the private frequency her commander had used above Vethkar. She thought about the coordinates of the ambush. She thought about the 3 names still walking. That night, in the private chamber of the ratification wing, she asked Cal Morden to come and speak with her. He came in the clean coat. He stood with his hands crossed at the wrist. He did not sit until she gestured. "I owe you," she said. It was the first honest thing she had said in a week of ceremony. "You paid the contract." "I owe you," she said. "More than the contract." Cal Morden looked at his hands. He said, "There are 3 names." "I know." "You know which 3? "I have a guess." "Radiance." He looked up at her. His eyes were tired in a way that did not go away with sleep. "Guessing is how people die." "Then help me not guess." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I need 6 months. I need access to the loading crew's chip archive. I need a room nobody comes into. I need coffee, real coffee, the kind from beans, not the mineral thing you serve here." He paused. He said, apologetic and a little dry, "The mineral thing is very bad." "Contractor Morden," Thesvara said, "you have all of it." He nodded. He stood. He said at the door, without turning around, "I said I would see you to the altar and back. The back part is the part I have not finished." He closed the door with the quiet care of a man closing the door on a sleeping child. The proxy war started 9 weeks later, and it did not look like a war at first. The Null Cord did not declare it. The Null Cord had learned on a wall of their own dead at Vethkar that declaring was expensive. They ran it through borrowed factions in the border systems, mercenary companies with laundered banners, planetary militias whose treasuries had been quietly bought, priest councils whose theology had been retrofitted with new grievances. It was a war that pretended to be many small, unrelated wars, and it pretended so well that the Veskari War Office did not, for 8 months, know it was fighting one thing. Cal Morden knew. He had been reading identification chips in a windowless room on the Tareth-neutral moon for 9 weeks, and the pattern he had built on the wall of that room did not care what banner the mercenaries carried. He walked into the situation chamber one morning with the pattern rolled under his arm and put it on the table without speaking. The War Office argued with the pattern for 6 hours. Cal Morden did not argue back. He drank the coffee that Thesvara had personally imported at absurd cost from a small planet in the Sol system, and he waited for the War Office to finish arguing. And when the War Office had finished arguing, he said, "It is the Null Cord. They are laundering it through 11 surface factions. 9 of the 11 are being paid through the same shell house on Karev Prime. Whoever owns that shell house owns this war." The War Office asked who owned the shell house. Cal Morden said, "I am working on it." Thesvara noticed that afternoon that Avon was not in the situation chamber. He had, he said afterward, been attending to consort duties in the residential wing. She noted the absence in a small locked file in her private terminal. She had begun keeping such a file. It was, she thought, the first thing she had ever done that her mother would not have approved of. The second demonstration of Cal Morden as a fighting instrument happened on Kerev Prime, and it was not meant to be a demonstration. It was meant to be a records raid. He had gone in with a small Tarith support team to break open the shell house's ledger, and the shell house's ledger had turned out to be guarded by a hired null-cord splinter unit that the treaty office had not technically believed still existed. Desvara watched the after-action footage from the Tareth Observer drone. She watched it 3 times. The Veskari cultural memory did not have a category for what the footage showed. Cal Morden moved through the ledger room with a fire axe. He explained afterward in his tired way, picked up the fire axe because his pistol had jammed on the first magazine and because the fire axe had been the closest heavy object. Veskari plasma armor was tuned to disperse energy attacks. A fire axe was, again, not energy. It was mass and edge, delivered at an angle a null-cord training program had never bothered to model. The axe went through the seam at the collar of the first commando's armor and did not stop until it hit the far side. The second commando tried to bring his lance around, and Cal Morden did not let him. He hit low, at the knee, and again at the elbow, and again at the throat, and the commando went down in 3 pieces that were, technically, still 1 piece. The Tarith support team, watching from the corridor, did not fire. They were later interviewed by their own command. The report said, in the Tarith's tidy phrasing, that they had not fired because they had not wished to interrupt. Cal Morden brought the ledger out under his arm. He was bleeding from a graze on the temple and from a plasma burn along his ribs that he had, at some point during the fight, closed with a length of Veskari medical tape and a lighter. He said in the debrief, "The pistol jammed. I will not use that model again." Desvara had been raised, from the moment she could walk, on the doctrine that her people were the apex predators of the sector. She had believed it. It was not that she stopped believing it after Kerev Prime. It was that she began to understand, in a slow and cold way, that the sector had another category above Apex, and that her people had not been the ones to occupy it. The ledger from Kerev Prime named 7 of the 11 surface factions and their paymasters. It did not name the shell house's ultimate owner. It named, however, an internal accounting code that Cal Morden studied for 11 days without speaking, and that he then, on the 12th day, walked into her private chamber to show her. Radiance. Cal, this accounting code. He set it on her table. It was written on the back of a piece of Veskari ration wrapping in permanent marker of the sort dock workers used to label crates in Anchorage. It belongs to a household. Veskari. Desvara went still. Which? I do not want to say the name until I am sure. Cal. He looked at her. He said, "Radiance, if I am wrong, and I say it, someone in this palace will kill me before I can be right." "Then be sure," Desvara said. "How long?" 6 months. "You have it." He nodded. He left. She sat looking at the ration wrapping for a long time. She thought about a smooth, cool, oil-on-water voice at her elbow saying, "Of course, Radiance," in every crisis of her adult life. She did not write his name down. She had begun, she realized, to think in the manner of the man she had once laughed at. Some things you did not write down. The proxy war ended in 15 months. It ended because the Tarith Assembly, on the strength of the Kerev Prime Ledger, published the names of the paymasters in 9 languages simultaneously, and the borrowed factions had nothing to spend and nowhere to hide. The Null Cord did not surrender. The Null Cord went quiet. Quiet, Cal Morden said, was worse. He said it standing at the window of the residential wing, looking at the shadow of Karveskan's larger moon. He had come to give her a report, and the report had been short, and he had lingered. Lingering was rare for him. Thesvara had learned to notice it. Quiet is worse. Because, she said, because they are picking targets. They only do this when they are picking targets. Whose? Yours. Thesvara had by this point been married for 18 months to a Vescari nobleman whose name did not particularly matter to the story of her life, and whose safety nevertheless mattered to her because she was a person who honored her contracts. She had come to like her husband. He was a good man of a limited kind. He did not deserve what was coming. She said, "You will not stop them. I will stop as many as I can. You are one man." Calmorden did not answer that. He looked at the moon. He said, "There is a photograph." "A what?" "A photograph." He touched the outside of his left boot, an unconscious motion. "In here, of a girl. My sister's daughter. She is 11. She lives in Anchorage. I have been meaning to mail it back to her mother for 2 years. Why do you keep it?" "Because," Calmorden said in his tired voice, "when I want to stop, I look at it, and I do not stop." Thesvara did not know how to answer that. She did not try. The quiet war ran for 3 years. It ran in restaurants and honor halls and shuttle bays and priest gardens, in the small pockets of the Vescari sphere where important people ate and prayed and slept. Assassins came for cabinet ministers and for treaty archivists and for shipwrights whose only crime was that they built vessels the Nullcord's remnants had wanted to sell. Calmorden was not a bodyguard. He was one man. But the War Office assigned him, on his own request, to a rotating threat analysis desk, and the desk produced a stream of small, precise warnings that the Vescari Internal Security Service began to trust in the way you trust a weather report from a very unhappy old man. Twice in the 3 years, Calmorden went himself. The first time was to a monastery on the third continent, where an assassin was walking a hall of contemplative old scholars with a Nullcord molecular blade. The second time was to a shipyard elevator on Kar Vesken, where an assassin had rigged the counterweights to drop 3 shift crews. Both times, Calmorden did not technically kill the assassin. Both times the assassin was found alive, bound, with careful clinical labels tied to their limbs, identifying which broken joint had been broken with which household tool. The Vescari courts had a hard time processing the assassins because the assassins would not stop apologizing. Thesvara read the reports. She thought about a man who did not technically kill anyone he did not have to kill. She thought about the wall of Nullcord dead at Veth Kar, which had been the killings he had had to do. She thought about how carefully he distinguished between the two, and how she had never met a Vescari commander who had bothered to make that distinction. And she thought about her mother, and about the pheromone tattoos of the elite skycasts, and about the small mineral cup of coffee that was not coffee. And she began to understand a thing about humans that the diplomatic corps had not written down. Humans, she thought, were not merciful because they were weak. Humans were merciful because they had counted the cost of being otherwise. She wrote this in her private locked file. She did not tell anyone. The Third War did not at first look like a war either. It looked like an assassination attempt. It happened at the treaty renewal banquet on the 6th anniversary of the Karev Prime Ledger, in the Grand Hall of the Ratification Wing, on a night that was supposed to be quiet ceremonial nostalgia. The Vescari nobility ate small ceremonial fish out of small ceremonial cups and pretended to remember an earlier and simpler generation of their politics. Avon, as Chamberlain, presided. Thesvara sat with her husband on her left and her mother on her right, and Calmorden, by contract and by insistence, at a small side table with a pot of real coffee that Thesvara had, personally, imported at absurd cost. The molecular blade came out of the sleeve of a Vescari sub-minister of protocol whose name was on nobody's threat list. The blade went for Thesvara. It did not reach her. What reached her instead was Calmorden, who had crossed the hall between one heartbeat and the next, in a way the security footage later argued about and could not fully explain, and who took the sub-minister's blade arm off at the shoulder with a Vescari ceremonial meat cleaver that had, until the previous second, been sitting decoratively at the head of the banquet table. The blade arm hit the floor. The sub-minister screamed. Cal Morden pinned him with a boot on the chest and looked without hurry across the hall at the head table. He looked at Avon. Avon did not run. That was, in the end, the thing that convicted Avon. He did not run. A guilty, innocent man would have run. A guilty, innocent man would have made a scene about his innocence. Avon, chamberlain of 6 generations of Vescari matriarchs, did the smooth, cool thing he had done all his adult life. He sat very still, and he tried to think of the correct sentence. Cal Morden did not give him time to find it. He walked to the head table. He did not run. He was bleeding from a graze on the neck where the sub-minister's blade had touched him on the way past. He did not appear to notice. He came around the side of the table and lifted Avon out of his chair by the front of the ceremonial sash and set him gently on the floor. "Chamberlain," he said. Avon found a sentence. It was, "Contractor. You sold the convoy route 6 years ago. Vethkar. That is a serious allegation. You sold it because your lord wanted the relay corridors open for the annexation and the treaty would have closed them. I do not know what you are. I have the accounting code." Cal Morden did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. "I have the Shell House ledger. I have the sub-minister's employment chain. I have the pattern of every assassination attempt on Her Radiance for the last 3 years overlaid on your travel logs. I have your name, Consort Avon, written on the inside of my left wrist in permanent marker. It has been there for 6 years. It is the 3rd name." There was a silence in the grand hall of the ratification wing that was the silence Thesvara had come over 6 years to know was the silence of humans about to do a thing. Avon said in his smooth, cool voice, "You would not dare in this hall." "I would," Cal Morden said. "Dare anywhere." The Vescari Internal Security Service moved then. They had been briefed quietly by Cal Morden 2 days earlier, and their team leader had orders that were both illegal and, in the moment, deeply satisfying to execute. They took Avon out of the grand hall in a manner that was not respectful of his rank. The sub-minister of protocol, missing his blade arm, was taken out on a stretcher. Cal Morden stood in the middle of the hall with the ceremonial meat cleaver still in his hand. The blood on it was Vescari blood. He looked at Thesvara. He looked at the hall of frozen nobility. He said, at conversational volume, "I would like to apologize to the kitchen staff. I will replace the cleaver." Nobody laughed. Nobody knew whether they were allowed to. The Third War, which the historians would later call the Chamberlain's War, ran 7 weeks. It was short because Cal Morden's threat analysis desk had, over 3 years, mapped every asset Avon's faction had bought, and the Vescari Internal Security Service, with Tarith intelligence support, moved on all of them at once. There were a great many small, brutal actions, and there were, in the end, a small number of large, clean arrests. There was a public trial. There were confessions. Avon, during his confession, was smooth, cool oil on water until the end. He apologized to his lord. He apologized to the Vescari matriarchs. He did not apologize to Thesvara. He did not apologize to the human, and the human was not, in the end, called to testify. Cal Morden did not want to be in the same room as Avon again. He said this to Thesvara privately. He said, "I would kill him. You would be within your rights." "I would not," Cal Morden said, "be within mine." He was, in this period, 40-hour awake. He had not slept properly in 11 days. He had a healing plasma burn along his left side where a splinter null-cord shooter had caught him in the raid on Avon's private dock. He had, at some point during the raid, put 3 of his own fingers back into their sockets against a bulkhead because there had not been time for a medic. Thesvara had watched the footage of the raid because she was the head of state, and the raid had been in her name, and she had watched him do the finger thing, and she had watched him take a plasma burn and keep moving, and she had watched him drop to one knee against a wall for a long, slow 10 count and then get up again, and she had turned off the footage and gone to her private chamber and sat in the dark for an hour. She had thought then of the medic on the flight home from Vethkar. The medic had said in his tidy voice, "Do not laugh at any oath a human makes to you ever again." She thought in the dark about the girl in Anchorage. She thought about the photograph. She thought about the small, terrible thing that made a man not sleep for 11 days. The clean end of the Chamberlain's War came in the great throne chamber of the Veskari Continuum. The ratification of the sentence was ceremonial. Avon was already in a Tarith-neutral holding facility, awaiting a life sentence in a monastery of contemplative silence, which was, by Veskari standards, worse than death. Thesvara did not attend the sentencing personally. She attended instead the small, quiet event that came after. Cal Morden walked into the throne chamber in a coat that was not clean. He had come, technically, from the raid on the last of Avon's private safe houses, and he had not been given time to change. He was bleeding through a bandage on his left side, where a lung had, that morning, partially collapsed. 3 of his fingers on his right hand were set with medical splints. There was a plasma burn where his left ear had been. He did not stand at attention. He did not salute. He walked to the center of the ceremonial floor and stopped, and he set a small metal object down on the black stone, and he stepped back from it. The object was Consort Avon's identification chip, snapped in half. The Veskari nobility in the observation ring did not know what to do with the gesture. It was not in the ceremonial rites. It was not diplomatically permissible for a Grade 2 civilian contractor to place any object on the ceremonial floor of the throne chamber. It was, in fact, an offense punishable by exile. Nobody said anything. Thesvara rose from the throne. She was, at this point in her life, matriarch of the Veskari Continuum and the head of the largest sovereign polity in 3 sectors, and she had presided over the ratification of 4 treaties and the sentencing of 37 traitors and the wedding of her own only daughter. She had, in the whole of that adult life, come down from the raised throne 3 times. This was the 4th. She came down. She crossed the ceremonial floor. She stopped in front of Cal Morden. She was taller than him by a full head. Her wing plates were relaxed. Her mother, watching from the observation ring, later told her that her face had been, in that moment, the face of a woman who had finally stopped being afraid of a thing that she had not known she had been afraid of. She said, "Contractor Morden." Radiance. "You said, on your word, that you would see me to the altar and back." He looked at her. His eyes were tired in the way they had been tired for 6 years. He said, "I have brought you back, Radiance." "You have." So. There was a small silence. He said, "So I am done." "You are." He nodded. He turned as if to go. He stopped. He turned back. He said, and this was the thing that the Veskari nobility, watching from the observation ring, would repeat to their grandchildren, the thing they would tell in the honor halls for a generation. "Radiance, I have been awake for 40 hours. There's a photograph folded in my left boot of a girl in Anchorage. I have been meaning to mail it back to her mother for 2 years. Is there anyone in this building who has real coffee, the kind from beans? Not the mineral thing you serve at state functions. I would take it as a personal favor." Thesvara looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly and with the full dignity of the matriarch of the Veskari Continuum, she began to laugh. It was not the laugh she had laughed at him 6 years earlier in a convoy bay above a dead moon. That laugh had been a small, hard laugh at a small, hard mining tool. This laugh was different. This laugh was the laugh a person laughs when they have understood, at last, that they were the small, hard thing, and the thing they had laughed at had been the largest thing in the room. She laughed, and then she stopped, and she said in the formal cadence of the throne chamber, "Contractor Morden, in the name of the Vescari Continuum, in the name of the 6 generations of matriarchs I speak for, in the name of a woman who once laughed at your oath in a convoy bay above Vethkar, and was wrong to do so." She reached up and unpinned the ceremonial thread from her wrist. The thread was 6 generations old. It was, by any reasonable Vescari accounting, priceless. She placed it in his good hand. She said, "The kitchen will bring you real coffee. The assembly will courier your photograph to Anchorage tonight. You will sleep in the guest wing of the palace for as many days as you wish. You will name any price, and it will be paid before you have finished naming it." Cal Morden looked at the thread in his hand. He looked at her. He said in his tired, dry voice, "That is generous, Radiance, but I do not need to be paid. I did the contract. You did more than the contract. I did what I said I would do." He shrugged, and he winced at the shrug, and he set the ceremonial thread very carefully back into her open palm, as if he were handing a small living thing back to its mother. "I do not lie about the small things. That is all." "Cal Morden," Thesvara said, "Radiance. There will be a statue." He looked at her, and for the first time in 6 years his tired face made a shape she had not seen on it before, which was the shape of a man who was, in a small, tired way, embarrassed. He said, "Please do not make a statue. My sister will laugh at me." "There will be a statue," Thesvara said, "and it will be very large." "Radiance." "Yes, Cal." "The coffee, please." They brought him coffee. He drank it standing in the middle of the throne chamber, in his ruined coat with 3 splintered fingers and a plasma burn where his left ear had been. He drank it slowly. He did not sit down. When he was finished with the cup, he handed it, with great care, to a bewildered ceremonial page. He turned and walked out of the throne chamber of the Vescari Continuum with the smooth, unhurried gait of a man walking off a dock at the end of a long shift. Thesvara watched him go. She stood very still for a long time after the great doors had closed behind him. Her wing plates were relaxed. Her mother came down from the observation ring and stood beside her without speaking. The Vescari nobility, uncertain what protocol required, said nothing. Thesvara said quietly, in a voice her mother heard and no one else did, "I laughed at his oath, Mother. I know, daughter. I was wrong to laugh. I know. I will not laugh at any oath a human makes to me ever again." Her mother, who had been matriarch before her, and who was old and had seen many things, said in a voice that was very dry and very Vescari and very small, "That is a beginning, daughter." Cal Morden slept for 2 days in the guest wing of the palace. On the 3rd day, he requested passage back to Anchorage. On the 4th day, the passage was arranged. On the 5th day, he was on a Tarith courier ship in a clean coat with the elbow patches replaced, drinking real coffee from a plain ceramic cup, with the ceremonial cleaver from the banquet hall wrapped in cloth in a case at his feet. Thesvara had made him take the cleaver. He had, after a long, tired argument, accepted it. He had said, at the end of the argument, that he would hang it on the wall of his sister's kitchen, and that his sister would probably not want it there, but that he would put it up anyway. The photograph was already in Anchorage. It had gone by assembly courier the night of the throne chamber ceremony. The girl was 12 now. The mother had put the photograph in a frame on the mantel of a small house at the edge of a cold city that killed people who made small mistakes. 6 months later, on the anniversary of the Karev Prime Ledger, the Vescari Assembly unveiled a statue in the courtyard of the ratification wing. The statue was very large. It was made from the tungsten of a null-cord commando shield, harvested on Vethkar and forged at Thesvara's specific instruction, in the shape of a small, tired man in a coat patched twice at the left elbow, holding a fire axe in one hand and a plain ceramic cup in the other. There was no inscription of rank. The statue's plaque, in 4 languages, said only "Contractor Morden," on his word. At the unveiling, the Veskari nobility stood in the appropriate formal rows. Desvara stood at the head of them. Her mother, older now and moving slowly, stood on her right. Her husband, who was a good man of a limited kind and who had understood over the years exactly what his wife's private locked file had contained, stood on her left. The Tarith Prime Speaker attended personally. The human embassy attended. A small girl of 12 from Anchorage, brought at the personal expense of the Veskari treasury, stood in the front row holding her mother's hand and staring up at the statue with the wide, unimpressed look of a 12-year-old who thought the coat looked wrong. Cal Morden did not attend. He had sent a short message. The message said in his tired, dry cadence, "Radiance, thank you for the invitation. I have a shift at the dock. I do not need to see the statue. I trust it will do fine without me. Regards, Cal." Tesvara read the message aloud at the unveiling, at the request of no protocol, and by the choice of the matriarch of the Veskari continuum. She read it in the formal cadence of the throne chamber. She read it without laughing. When she was finished, she folded the message and put it in the small, locked pocket of her ceremonial sash, and did not take it out again for the rest of her life. She had laughed at his oath once in a convoy bay above a dead moon called Veth-Kar, because it had sounded like the thing a small mining tool would say to a matriarch. She had thought then that she understood the shape of the sector she lived in. She had thought that her people were the apex thing in that sector, and that a man in a patched coat from a cold city on a small blue planet was a joke that history would forget. She never laughed at that oath again. She never laughed at any oath. And in the archives of the Veskari continuum, in the private locked file of the matriarch, in a single line written in her own claw, in a hand no scribe had ever seen, was the sentence she had written on the night of the throne chamber ceremony, after the human had walked out of her palace with the smooth, unhurried gait of a man walking off a dock at the end of a long shift. The sentence said, "We are not the top of the sector. We are the second thing. The first thing is a tired man from Anchorage who does not lie about the small things." What a journey! What a slow, terrible, beautiful journey. The real strength in this story was not the tungsten, and it was not the fire axe, and it was not the wall of Nullcore dead on Veth-Kar. The real strength was the small, quiet refusal of one tired man to break a small promise made in a convoy bay above a dead moon. If you loved this story, leave your like. It is what keeps these tales alive out here in the dark. Share it with anyone who loves science fiction about a human standing against the impossible. Subscribe to the channel and tap the little bell so you do not miss the next HFY epic. And here is the question I want you to answer down in the comments, because I want to hear it in your own words. Would you have hired Cal Morden to train your bodyguard corps? Or would you have taken the payoff and gone quietly back to Earth? Choose one. Tell me why. Keep your eyes on the empty sky out there, friend, and keep looking up at the stars.